Hi AP Psych friends, this is your second video for Unit 2 and we are going to talk in this one about correlational research. So this is still under methods of research. Remember in the last video that you watched we were talking about descriptive methods of research like observations, surveys, and case studies. And so this time we're going to talk about correlational methods. So what do you use them for? Well, they're used to study the data collected during a descriptive method of research. Probably not so much case studies, but especially observations and surveys. Great, we have all of this data. What does it mean? We use correlational methods to determine if there's any sort of relationship between the factors within our studies. And so when we talk about correlational methods, we are looking for patterns in the data that we've collected to find correlation or relationship. And so when we talk about this, we can talk about it either having a positive or direct correlation, or we can talk about things having a negative or inverse correlation. Okay, again, if you've taken a stats class, don't tell Mr. Heiss that this is how I describe it. It's overly simplistic, but it works for AP Psych. Positive is going to mean that our factors rise and fall together. So we'll do examples in class, but just to give you an idea as you watch the video, we could talk about perhaps that fake survey we talked about with Perry High School admin wanting to know the study habits of Perry High students. Maybe we'll end up finding with the data that's collected on our survey that we have a direct correlation between amount of time devoted to studies and GPA. That would be the more you study, the higher the GPA, the less you study, the lower the GPA. That's an example of a direct correlation or a positive relationship. Negative or inverse, as one factor increases, the other decreases, and vice versa. And so a common example in the world of psychology is the inverse correlation between stress levels and overall physical health, and that we've analyzed data and determined that the more stressed a person is, the poorer their overall physical health, and the better one's physical health, the less stress that seems to be connected to that individual. So that would be an example of negative correlation. When we are looking at correlation, the statistical measure of that is what's known as a correlational coefficient, or Pearson R value. Now, we won't spend a lot of time calculating the R value or the coefficient per se, but it is important in AP Psych that you can understand what a correlational coefficient is and what it means, or in the interpretation of data. And so if this is our statistical measure of the relationship between two things, or I like to think of it as the strength of the correlation, you're going to have a range from -1 to +1, with your -1 being perfect inverse correlation and your +1 being perfect direct correlation, which no, in the real world, rarely do either extremes actually occur in research, but your goal obviously would see, the closer you get to those two ends or those two extremes, the stronger the relationship is between your two factors. Okay, something else that we will come across from the wonderful world of statistics is a scatter plot, which is a graph, and it always seems like there's an AP Psych question that is requiring you to analyze a scatter plot of some data. And so know that a scatter plot is just a graphed cluster of dots, and the dots represent values of two variables. And so the slope of these dots can suggest relationship of the variables. And so the amount of scatter can tell us the strength of the correlation. So dependent upon the slope of the dot, you can tell whether or not it was a direct or an inverse correlation, and then the amount of scatter of the dots will tell you how strong the correlation is. So obviously the tighter the dots or the less scatter, the better your correlation. So again, visuals will probably help, and know that we'll do an activity in class that will allow you to create your own scatter plot and totally understand what I meant in that explanation. So if that's a little bit confusing, bring your questions to class and stay tuned. I think the application will make it all make sense. One of the things that we have to be careful of concerning correlational research is the concept known as illusory correlation. Illusory correlation is a perceived relationship, but it's not really there. Like, the data does not show a relationship or a correlation of any kind. And so keep that in mind, that lots of times some of the stuff that you hear, like, oh, that's just common sense, is actually illusory correlation. That it's interpreted as being there, but it's not really in existence. And so think back to part 1 of Unit 2. Illusory correlation is usually the result of hindsight bias or confirmation bias, basically, not having the critical thinking skills or the scientific mindset to actually support your assertions with data. And so that's important to keep in mind. Okay, and so as we end our second category of research methods, something to keep in mind: correlation does not equal causation. Okay, this is a very important point to remember. Because two things are related does not necessarily mean that one has caused the other to occur. So in our example of negative correlation, when I'd said that research usually shows an inverse relationship between stress levels and overall physical health, we don't know if one has caused the other to happen or if some other variable is having an effect on those two factors. And so, is it being stressed out makes you get sick, or is it being sick it stresses you out, or is there something else that is causing one or both, or some other third factor playing a role in that? All right, and so just because we found relationship between two variables does not determine whether one has caused the other to happen. For that, you have to stay tuned to our next video, where we will talk about experimental methods. So thank you for listening. See you in class.